Welcome back, fiber friends, to episode 2 of the Wool to Gold podcast. My name is Brian. I'm going to be your host today. We are going to be talking about wheels, how to become best friends with your wheels, different types of wheels, the types of wheels I have. I am going to be introducing both of my wheels by name, and today I'm going to be starting with my more complex wheel, and that's going to be my Schacht Matchless Marion. Now, Marion here is 32, going on 33 years old. I'm going to lift her up so that you can see that she is a single treadle wheel, which essentially means that our treadle here is just one piece of wood instead of being split down the middle. Now, because she is a single treadle, although some wheels that are double treadle, depending on how their setup are, will also only have one footman, your footman is going to attach your treadle to your drive wheel here. Now, I'm going to turn around and show you the footman in just a moment, but I did want to go over the drive wheel as well, because the drive wheel is generally what a lot of people would call the actual wheel of the spinning wheel. Now, this is going to be our front leg and our back leg, and the footman is going to travel through the back leg again to attach to our drive wheel there. This is going to be our footman right here on the Schacht Matchless. Now, right up here, just moving slightly upward, on the Schacht Matchlesses, they all have a serial number here, and that's going to represent the day that they were born. I'm going to give you a close-up of that in just a moment. I just realized that I jumped right into wheel anatomy, which was not my initial plan for this. So bear with me again, because I'm still kind of working out the kinks of how I want to set up these podcasts. Before I start moving upwards and getting into the more complicated anatomy of the wheel, I did want to do a weekly whip check. If you watched the first episode of the Wool to Gold podcast, then you know that I initially said that I didn't want to do a whip check every week. One of the reasons for that is because I don't do this full-time. I do this part-time, and I felt like my whips wouldn't have enough progress for me to show off. However, I decided that in spirit of transparency, I wanted to show you guys just how long it really takes me to do some of these projects that I end up showing off on TikTok or on Instagram. I also want to use these whip checks to just be transparent with you guys when things go a little bit awry or not as planned. So if you've been following for a while, you know that I have had plans to fix up this sweater for a while. I have a big bleach stain in the middle of it. Not a big bleach stain, but enough of a bleach stain. So I wanted to add a hoodie pocket to this sweater. Maybe eventually get to the point of adding a hood to it, but we'll see. And I thought I had finished the piece of fabric that I was going to use for the hoodie pocket, but in classic nature of felting, of course, I did not make a big enough piece of fabric. We're gonna have to make a second piece that's a little bit bigger than this. What I did finish for that project is a little bit of this hand-spun thread. Now, it is a little bit hairy. I did have to do a woolen-ish spin, unfortunately, because I wanted to blend the sari silk with wool. The reason I wanted to do this is because I did do a little bit of research, and that seemed to be the common thread. That the sari silk or just a silk should be blended with a little bit of wool to help smooth everything out. I did find that to be the case. My thread did end up being a lot smoother once it was blended with some wool. So we're going to leave it a little bit hairy. We're going to see how it wears and tears. If I have to re-sew it, it's not the end of the world. This is for a visible mending project. This sweater would have ended up in the garbage, I think, in a lot of other people's households. So I'm just happy that I can save it, even if it takes a few tries to save it. And then, of course, we have my crochet project for the week. So if you've been following along, you know that I've been working on this capelet. I did cast on, you know, the actual capelet part. And right now, I am just crocheting up some Shetland. I think I'm about 8 or 10 rows in. At about row 14, I get to stop the increases and just crank the rest of the rows out, I'm pretty sure. So this will be a great mindless project for later in the week. And then last but not least, I did want to show off this hand-carded California red. This is a fleece that I picked up from the spinning loft. I only have 4 ounces, but I do expect to get a nice amount of yardage out of it, and I am just obsessed with this color. I'm not sure if you can tell, but the California red, they're born a little reddish brown. I think this was a second-year fleece. It's not a yearling. I would love to get my hands on a California red lamb's fleece. What a dream. However, this is, I believe, a second-year shear. It is absolutely beautiful. It has this really nice cream color, and the hand is just nice. This is going to end up being soft enough, at least in my opinion, for a hat or a scarf. It's super fluffy. I only have about an ounce more to card, and I think that this is what I'm going to start spinning next. So as you might have noticed, I don't have anything on my spinning wheel right now, and I actually don't have anything on either of my spinning wheels. This is not for show, just to make it easier to show you the different parts of my spinning wheels. I genuinely, for the first time in months, do not have a specific project that I'm spinning for right now. I'm just not feeling any of the projects that I sort of have planned on my docket for the next month. So we're gonna spin up some fleece because that always makes me feel better, and we're gonna see how we feel after that. Thank you for following along on that little whip check break. I hope you enjoyed. Now bring your notebook back out if we are studying our wheels today, or perhaps you have a Schacht Matchless at home that you are not necessarily best friends with yet. So we already covered the drive wheel, we covered the front and back leg. Now the front and back leg travel up here to the mother of all. Now the mother of all is going to be this wooden part that I am referencing right here. And the mother of all is going to attach to the front maiden. Front maiden is going to house the orifice, I guess, joint, where the orifice hole generally goes of the flyer. Now your flyer, since this is already loosened, I can take this right out, and I'll take it off of the Scotch tension and the drive band. So your flyer is really only going to be this piece right here. The hooks along it are going to be your flyer hooks. Not all flyers look or are built alike, so do keep that in mind. If you have a different type of wheel, your wheel's flyer might not have hooks up and down. It might be like the Lendrum, where it has sort of a sliding loop on it. Now, your flyer is the house for your bobbins. This is what the Schacht Matchless bobbins look like. Or really just the Schacht bobbins in general, since all of the pieces are interchangeable. Do keep in mind that these bobbins do have a right or wrong side to set them up in, depending on the drive system you have your Schacht Matchless set to. Now, this is one of the reasons that I absolutely adore the Schacht Matchless, and I do not recommend it for first-timers. Specifically, I don't recommend it as your learning wheel. You might be like myself, where you sit down in front of a Schacht and you try it for the first time and you love this absolute antique drive of a wheel. I mean, there's a reason they call it the Cadillac of wheels. However, as a beginner, if it takes you a little bit already to set up your wheel, right? It takes you a few minutes to set it all up. Maybe you've started with an e-spinner, or you already have a little bit of a simpler wheel, you're looking into getting a Schacht Matchless. I do think it's important to keep in mind that it can be a little bit irritating if it already takes you 5 minutes to set up your wheel if you put the bobbin in backwards. Now, if you have it in Scotch tension, you need to have this fatter side facing the inside of the wheel and the thinner one facing you. Now, you're gonna have that flipped if it's in double drive, keep that in mind. And one of the really cool things about the Schacht Matchless, I think, is so I have the slow and the fast whirl here, and right in the middle is the standard. And you can see the variety of ratios that you can get from this wheel by switching out the whorls. I'm going to do an entire episode about whorls and ratios, so if you don't quite understand that, wait until a later episode. I'll get to it, I promise. Today, though, we are talking about the anatomy of the wheel, and I do have my wheel set up for Scotch tension. So your Scotch tension hole tightener is going to be right over here. And then this is going to be, again, I have it set up in single drive, so I only have a single drive band. On the Schacht Matchless, up here is going to be your drive band adjuster that moves things up and down. And then on the back of the Schacht Matchless, it is quite neat. You do have some extra storage for a whirl. I have an extra fast whirl back here. If anybody has a super fast whirl or a super slow whirl and they want to trade, they want a fast whirl, slide into my DMs. Hit me up. We'll make a trade. One of the last things I did want to point out about the Schacht Matchless is that it doesn't have anywhere immediately available on it to store your orifice hooks. Now, these are going to be orifice hooks. They help you pull your lead through the orifice, and I am going to actually demonstrate that on the Lendrum once I bring it out, because it is a little bit more of a simpler setup. However, I did just want you to have all of the details about the Schacht. Now, the Lendrum, my Lendrum, Bennie, is very, very cool as well. She is going to have a little bit of a storage area for her orifice. However, again, my Schacht Matchless here, Marion, she is my heart wheel. She is my first love, and I do like to do a lot of my default spins on Marion. Now, before I introduce you to Bennie here, my Lendrum, this lovely lady, I did want to gently touch on the fact that I didn't go into too much detail about the Schacht Matchless's drive band. I think it's important to keep in mind that different wheels require different drive bands. If you are really struggling with your wheel and you're not sure if the drive band that you have on it is what is actually recommended by the manufacturer, do look into that. On this Lendrum, it requires a poly band, which is essentially a plastic rubbery band as the drive band. However, the Schacht Matchless requires more of a kitchen cotton setup with a little bit of beeswax to help it just be a little catchy on that wooden wheel. Now, moving on, this is Bennie. She is made in Canada. She is a beautiful and simple wheel. She is a double treadle, and I generally do like to start beginners on double treadle because they find they have a lot more control with the double treadle. Now, as you can see, it's kind of like a bicycle. It has 2 treadles here, and that travels up. The footman is going to be on the front on the Lendrum. However, it is once again, because of the way it's set up, just a single footman, and that attaches once again to the main drive wheel. Now, that's easy enough, right? The bottom of a lot of wheels are pretty similar. I think a lot of the differences come more towards the top part. Another thing to keep in mind here is that I only have castle-style wheels. I don't have any Saxony-style wheels. Saxony-style wheels are going to have a totally different setup, and frankly, I know little to nothing about them. So if you do have questions about Saxony-style wheels, I might point you towards, once again, the lovely Jillian Eve, who has a lot more information on both Saxony wheels and drop spindling than I currently do. The main reasons that I really love Bennie for beginners is because she's really difficult to set up incorrectly. So as you can see, the Lendrum bobbin is a lot simpler. This is like the IKEA of wheels, and I mean that in the best way. It is nearly impossible to set this up incorrectly. So there is no right or wrong way to put the bobbin on. There is no right or wrong side. The flyer here doesn't have hooks along the sides, which I do find is a little bit easier for not getting things tangled for beginners. It has a loop that you can slide up and down. It's adjustable. And then another loop on the top of the flyer here to help guide that yarn into the orifice. Here you can see that the Lendrum has a variety of ratio sizes that you can adjust it to on this classic flyer. I unfortunately don't know as much about my Lendrum as I do my Schacht Matchless. My Schacht Matchless and I are best friends. I will admit that I tend to take advantage of the friendship between me and my Lendrum. We're besties because she'll go anywhere with me. She folds up real compact. Again, she's great to introduce beginners. She's very simple. However, I do take advantage of her. I don't know the full capacity of what I can achieve with my Lendrum just because of the amazing, outstanding range of yarns that I am capable of making on my Schacht. I really rely on Bennie when I just need a quick setup of something new for live, or if I'm doing travel spinning or outdoor public spinning. Just like with our other wheel, you are going to put the bobbin onto the flyer. The Lendrum is set up for Scotch tension, which again, I do find is easiest for beginners. I know there are some people who fell in love with Irish tension, and that's what kept them spinning. But I know an equal amount of people who didn't go back to spinning for years because they were so scared off by Irish tension wheels. I do think Irish tension spinners are a specific bunch, too. We all have our own personality quirks. I certainly do. And I just think that they tend to be a very distinct bunch. I'll leave it at that. You're going to need to remember when setting up the Lendrum is that you need to remember to put your tension band on. You don't necessarily need to have the drive band set up like you would on the Schacht. Once your drive band is on, again, on the Lendrum, I have a poly band here. I'm not sure how clearly that you can see that. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you about the Lendrum is that it does have the orifice hook right here. You pull this out and you have a little hook It's already on here. That is another reason that I like to bring this for public spins, because God forbid I forget an actual orifice hook. I already have one on the wheel. You use it to pull through your lead, and just like any other wheel, now you're ready to start spinning. Now, there are some additional accessories that I would recommend that you get, especially depending on the different types of spinning wheel that you have. Regardless of the type of spinning wheel you have, you should most likely have spinning wheel oil. Any traditional wheel is going to require some amount of oiling in certain places. This one is going to be from either the Woolery or Paradise Fibers. This isn't sponsored. I just buy a lot of things from both of those places, and I really like it because it gets into all the nooks and crannies. I don't necessarily need it for my Lendrum, but for my Schacht Matchless, this applicator is worth it. I do have this Singer oil as well that I plan on refilling this with once it's out of the initial spinning wheel oil. Another thing I mentioned before is that depending on the type of wheel you have, you're going to need different types of drive bands. I do have extra poly bands for my Lendrum. However, I have noticed that because of the nature of the poly band, which is that you have to cut it and melt it, if you're unfamiliar, you need a lighter to set up a poly band. Keep that in mind. It's not one of those things you want to do late at night. For the poly band, once it starts to loosen, I have noticed that if you just trim off the part that you melted previously and then melt those two ends together, the amount of space that you have tightened it is generally enough to continue that drive band's life for another few months. I have yet to need to fully replace my drive band, so I'll keep you guys in the loop to when that poly band finally actually gives out. But for the Schacht Matchless, I just use a standard kitchen cotton. If you end up getting some crochet cotton that's a little bit soft, what is recommended is you take a little bit of craft beeswax to it. This is going to help it just be a little bit sticky, a little bit catchy. If you're having trouble with your Schacht Matchless drive band, just sliding around on the wheel and making sort of a whoosh sound, get yourself some beeswax. It'll really help. Same goes for that Scotch tension band if you're having trouble with that as well. As I mentioned before, if your wheel doesn't already come with an orifice hook or a place to store an orifice hook, I do recommend getting a few, even if they are just very simple ones, and having a regular place that you store them so you don't lose them. I should have a pouch that I crocheted for each of my spinning wheels. However, I am lazy and I have not gotten around to that project, so those will come one day. Maybe when I get some wraps per inch guides as well, and some of those other fancy schmancy spinning tools that you can attach to your spinning wheel. Or that depending on the type of wheel you have, you might be able to purchase other types of accessories like interchangeable whorls. The last things that I recommend you pick up is not a necessity. However, I do think that if you want to improve your spinning very quickly over a short period of time, it is absolutely a necessity, and that is going to be labels. I cannot understate the importance of keeping records when it comes to spinning. I did not think it was that important when I first started spinning, and now as a slightly more experienced spinner, again, I'm talking less than a year here, I think that they are an absolute game changer. First, it's super satisfying and absolutely adorable to label your hand-spun yarns. People love it. They like to read the little labels. It's very cute. You get to name them. It's very motivating. You write down your yardage and the ply, so you never forget exactly how much yarn you have. I don't know how some of you just look at a skein and remember, like, oh yeah,
I spun 536 yards. How do you know that? How do you know that? Where do you keep this information?
But if you're like me and you can't always remember, I highly recommend these little labels on the back side. That's usually where I put which wheel I spun it on, at what ratio, depending on if I measured my treadle speed, my wraps per inch. There's just a lot of things that I can put on the back, whether it's finished Z-twist or S-twist, how many grams, how much it weighs. I even like to go as far as writing down a lot of the times where I sourced the fiber, just in case somebody else or myself wants to rebuy that fiber. That doesn't always work out because, again, I buy a lot of D-stash, but lately I've been able to label a lot of my yarns. And because I do breed studies, this is overwhelmingly helpful. I love white yarn. I don't know what it is about spinning near white fleece, cream fleece. It's addicting. It's fantastic. I can't believe the yarns come out so differently from each other and the different samples. I think that's why I love it so much. But I have probably 10 to 15 skeins of white yarn, of mini skeins, mind you. This is like 30 to 60 yards each of white yarn just sitting around. If those weren't labeled, I would have no idea. I would have no idea what any of them are. I have one unlabeled skein in my entire collection, and I still, even with the power of deduction, cannot figure out exactly what it is. It's either colored Cotswold or colored BFL, and I have no idea. Once again, guys, thank you so much for coming along for this second episode of the Wool to Gold podcast, especially if you saw us through the first episode. I appreciate you sticking it through and watching us get better at this every single time I try. Next episode, I am going to be talking about a few more spinning and other yarn accessories like these nitty knotties, the Swift. I'm going to be pulling out my hand carders and my wool picker to show you. And more than likely, I'll be going over some new acquisitions that I got at Rhinebeck. If you don't already follow me on TikTok, I am Wool to Gold. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, I'm over there as Brian Koshan, and I will have my shop linked below if you are interested in supporting me as a small artist. I have samples of Livestock Conservancy breed fleeces available, pre-scoured for you, available in 2 ounce, 4 ounce, and half pound bumps. And I also have some hand spun yarns if you're interested in supporting me in that way as well. I'll see you guys next week on the Wool to Gold podcast. Go make something and have a wonderful week.